When I first tested out the emulation for the Sega Saturn in anticipation for my review of Sakura Taisen, there were 3 things that I wanted to test out ahead of time. These were the main games that I'd wanted to play for ages but never had the proper access to before then. The first 2 being Die Hard Arcade and Daytona USA. The last being the Panzer Dragoon series. So, with a remake of the first game already being out for a while and one for the second game being on its way, it's time to strap yourself to your favorite armored Drake and dive right into Panzer Dragoon. Panzer Dragoon opens up with a surprisingly large-scale opening cutscene for its time. The story, or what we're told of it anyway, comes down to humanity being a complete mess thanks to a war using overpowered weapons. Humanity fighting amongst themselves, but also fighting against monsters that could overthrow all sides at any time. The main character, named Keel according to Wikipedia, but not named anywhere in the game that I played, is a nomadic hunter, kind of thrown into a larger conflict by stumbling his way into ancient ruins. 2 soldiers are fighting on the backs of dragoons in there, with one of the dragoon riders getting shot in the chest and immediately dying. Keel then gets on the back of the blue dragon in front of him, given the objective to not let the other dragon get to some tower far, far away, and with that, we're off. The plot itself isn't all that interesting, but the way that it's told definitely is. There's a larger story out there, part of a larger world, but you're only seeing this one action-packed slice of it. I like how all the in-game dialogue, or what little there is of it anyway, is all in foreign-sounding tongues. It gives it a very alien feeling to it. It's really no surprise that they plan to make an RPG in this series not long after making the original. Though, in the case of the first 2 titles, all of this is just the backdrop to a very great rail shooter. Panzer Dragoon plays in a way that's very comparable to Star Fox, though comparing it to that and calling it a day would be selling the game short, even if it was a very obvious reference point for the developers. The controls in Panzer Dragoon are very different from Star Fox though. The dragon has some more momentum to his movement, like he's slowly following your aim reticle as you're pulling it in these directions rather than directly controlling it. Also, you're allowed to have up and down be normal instead of inverted like it is in Star Fox. That's something that I didn't remember, but really struggled with going back when I wanted to capture the footage for this video. And instead of getting the one homing shot from locking onto enemies that causes a big blast to take out groups in one go like in Star Fox 64, you've got a chain of lock-ons that shoot out consecutive laser beams homing in on enemies. There's no bonus for shooting down large groups of enemies in a single shot tying into a scoring system here. Instead, the game rewards you for the percentage of enemies shot down at the end of the stage with extra lives. The big thing that sets Panzer Dragoon apart from a lot of other games though is how the stages progress. There's no boosting, no brakes, no somersault, and at no point does the stage stop for you to defeat any enemies outside of maybe the boss fight at the end of the stage. Because of this, the music is finely tuned to the stage progression. During development, they worked on the soundtrack after they finished development on the game itself, giving them the opportunity to fit the music to the stage progression especially well, with tons of audio cues that are extremely specific to action beats in the stages, since they always knew exactly where you were and what you're going to be doing at any point in the song. It gives the game a very carefully controlled flow, almost feeling cinematic like a movie, which is what the developers were shooting for. Though personally, it kept making me think of very well-paced amusement park dark rides. Especially because of the way that you look around in Panzer Dragoon. It's one of the main things the series is known for besides the fact that you ride an armored dragon. At any point you can press the shoulder buttons to look to your left or right or even behind you. And enemies can appear from all those directions at any time, with the radar telling you where they're coming from so you're not completely blindsided by them at all times, at least in theory. I was still having issues tracking where exactly enemies were coming from, since the radar doesn't really give you any info on their height. So sometimes an enemy spawns right behind you and flies exactly over you, and if you don't duck exactly when the game wants you to in that exact moment, you'll eat a hit. Turning around is a bit weird in a way that takes some getting used to as well. You only get proper movement controls looking forward. Turn around and your dragon remains in place, only giving you the ability to aim. So dodging projectiles based on altitude is not something that you can do while looking to the side. Though at least you can shoot down a lot of the slow-moving projectiles in the game. Some of the later stages, enemies can start firing off at you the second that they're visible, making it pretty hard to respond to them. Almost like you're dealing with a hit scanner in a build engine game. And on top of that, it's pretty hard to gauge distances on enemy projectiles sometimes, since they're 2D sprites coming at you in a 3D environment, and they're not always skilled in a way that makes distances easy to read. It can be pretty frustrating to deal with at times, especially your first go around. But even with all these problems, Panzer Dragoon is still not an especially hard game, and I do have to add, I was playing the US version. As was often the case with games from this era, they made the Western versions extra hard compared to the original Japanese release. Something that was likely done in an effort to combat rental, which never really made sense to me. To combat rental and ensure people buy your game, you're giving them a worse game. That'll make them buy it. But even then, it's not a hard game to clear on your first attempt. And still only takes about an hour to get through, even if you died a bunch of times. It's easy enough to get extra credits early into the game, and there aren't that many stages to go through. So even with the odd cheap hit slipping under your radar, it's totally doable. The biggest worry you have in terms of difficulty is how your health doesn't regenerate during the stages. There's no power-ups or special weapons in the game in general. All you get is your regular fire, your lock-on, and some health recovery between stages. Beyond that, you're on your own. Which sounds like it could be an issue, but it keeps the game simple and fun. And I did say I like games doing one thing very well in the last poll, and this game, well, it does that. To get the ultimate experience, I played through this game using a Saturn pad. I never grew up with a Sega Saturn, but I do like these controllers. It's not like the button layout really demands it in Panzer Dragoon or anything, but still. It's nice to be able to accurately emulate Saturn games with the right kind of controller for it. But what about those without the means to either play the original emulated version or on real hardware? The original only goes for way too much for any non-crazy person anyway, and not anyone has the hardware to run games using Metnafen. Well, there's actually an option for those this time around, since there's a remake that came out a few years ago and it's pretty okay. It looks pretty nice, though the game loses a lot of its charm this way. There's nothing wrong with the gameplay itself, it's pretty solid, but a lot of the issues with being blindsided by things due to poor visibility somehow are still an issue here, which I found pretty surprising because I figured the larger view window would help solve that, what with this game being widescreen now and all. They definitely did their best to make this an absolutely gorgeous looking release, and I will give the studio behind it, Megapixel, credit for that. But the original had this kind of surreal, alienistic feeling to it that has been washed away by cleaner visuals. I think the best example of the difference in art direction and what was lost in it is the credit sequence of both games, since they both use concept art for the game, highlighting the art in a pretty neat way once you finish your 1-hour flight. And while it's neat to see the new artwork for the new release, it also looks kind of incredibly plain, especially compared to what was used for the original. That said, if you have no other options for whatever reason, it's not a terrible experience. Though if you're capable of experiencing the original by any means, go for it. Or do what I do and buy new re-releases and remakes, but keep emulating the original versions so you can have your cake and eat it too. Besides, it's not bad to see familiar games in a new light, even if the original is better anyway. It gives more appreciation and awareness for the decisions that led to the original being the way that it is. So, do I recommend Panzer Dragoon? Yeah, it's short but sweet, and I'd say it holds up. Maybe don't buy overpriced copies on eBay though, both for the original and the limited run release of the new remake. They both go for absurd prices. The original is very good, and the remake is alright as well, though I really recommend the original over it. Speaking of remakes in comparison to originals, I asked people on Patreon an important question: how do we feel about remakes? Well, the results are very clear here, and for a change, I do really agree with them. In pretty much all cases, I'd prefer to keep the original. I think the best remakes are the kind that don't try to replace the original, instead being a different enough game that it can stand next to what came before. Resident Evil 2's remake is a very good example of this. Though, remakes like these are pretty rare, and remasters are kind of fine for availability, I guess. Though I'm always afraid when remasters and re-releases get dumped on consoles, so we're back to square one in a few years, when the inevitable new generation shift happens, and this new version is suddenly not on the newest hardware anymore. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, maybe leave a like or subscribe for more in the future. As always, these videos have been brought to you by the support of the people you see scrolling on the screen right now. If you'd like to become one of the names that you see on the screen now and maybe get early access to new videos, head over to patreon.com/AboveUp or become a channel member and I will, see ya.